The most common type of investigation requested by clients to an investigative agency is an asset search investigation. And typically, this has to do with some type of a loss or litigation where there's a judgment or a prospective fraud against the client that they want to recover money or assets from the debtor or from the fraudster. And the way an asset search is done is by categorizing all the different types of asset classes and doing a search within each one. For example, there are assets that may be bank accounts, there may be real estate, there may be vehicles. There's also intellectual property assets such as websites, trademarks, domain names, even things like DBA, fictitious names. Those could be valuable assets. And we'll talk a little bit about why some of these assets are valuable to recover, but also why they're valuable to claim against, even if direct recovery may not benefit the creditor. There's other asset classes that are corporate assets and even tangible assets that are not vehicles. For example, vessels, aircraft, equipment. Those are assets which may have an extreme utility value to the debtor. So claiming them in many cases has more value to negotiate settlement than it does to claim and then recover and resell for the creditor. So searching assets isn't like doing a Google search. It's not like a magic database where you push a button and all the assets for a person show up. There are investigator databases that a licensed private investigator will use to begin the search to get an idea of where some of these assets may be searched for. But any kind of database search or online search really will not have results that are, first of all, usable, but second of all, probably accurate. It'll give you some identity information. It's more really a background check than it is an asset search. The way an asset search is done is looking at the registration and recording official records for each class. For example, for real estate, you're going to search at the original deed clerk of court or recorder of deeds in the county where the records are. That way you can use these records and they're valuable. And more importantly, there may be more valuable information in those deeds than just the ownership of a property. You pull up a real estate deed, the actual document, it'll show you that your debtor, Joe Schmo, might own the property, but it will probably show more valuable information than just their property ownership, things that might lead you to bank accounts. So we'll get into that when we look at each category. And that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to look at each category. We're going to show you how to do the search for every type of asset class, because most of the cost of doing a asset search and an asset investigation is labor. It's time consumed. It's man hours of research. So for many clients, the option of being able to do some of this research yourself and obtain the same results might be a way to save some money. And if you're an investigator, this will give you some of the search techniques used for an asset research case. In addition to that, the different types of asset searches should be done in a particular order. You should do the real estate first, the vehicle second, and save the bank account searches for towards the end, because much of the information that you obtain and extract from the first searches can be used to either eliminate some of the bank account search requirement or to make that go faster, because the bank account search has the highest outside cost. For example, a real estate search, if you do it yourself, might only have a $5 or $10 hard cost to perform to access the records, where bank account search could be in the hundreds of dollars. So if you do a lot of the other searching first, it may eliminate some of the cost of the bank account search process. So take a look at the order of the searches as we do them, and you'll see how the results from one will chain to the next search to make the subsequent search of the asset class simpler, but also maybe eliminate some of the requirement to do some of the more expensive, costly search types. Follow along each of the categories and keep notes of as you're doing each one. If you do a real estate search, keep good notes, because the matrix of information that you get from that first search you'll need for the next one. So let's dive in first to the real estate section of the asset class, and then from that we'll jump into the vehicles and then follow up towards the end with the bank account searching types. This section is the asset search regarding real estate and properties. What you'll find is every county has a separate recording division for real estate records, deeds, mortgages, liens, quitclaim deeds, that kind of thing. And real estate recordings are done at the county level. So wherever the property is, that county will retain those documents. And these are truly documents. They are paper forms. It's not data. It's not any kind of electronic records. And here's a perfect example. This is Manatee County in Florida, and you'll go first to their public records hub, and you can search these official records by several different types of data. You can search by the name of the person, by the subdivision, case number, book and page, but in most cases you're going to be searching by name. And an example of that kind of search, we just put in a random name of Smith as a last name, and it'll bring up all of the documents that have the name Smith as a recorded grantee or grantor. So you'll see, Raleigh Smith, Stephen Smith, Eugene Smith, and it could be a from or to, a buyer or a seller, or a mortgage company or a lender. And, we'll just pick a couple random ones and see what it looks like, because not only do these documents show ownership of real estate, there is valuable asset information contained on many of these documents. So for example, we're going to look at this mortgage, and again, these are public records. It doesn't mean anything about these particular individuals. It's just random selections that may come up. So here is a mortgage that was recorded by a credit union where this particular person borrowed money on a revolving credit mortgage. The first thing you're going to look at is the very top of the page. It's going to show a recording record, the book and page, how much it costs to record that document, and other recording information. That's done after the fact. This was a paper document that was signed, usually at a law firm or at some official office. You notice above the line it has what's called a return to block. This is where the document goes after it's recorded. This is valuable information because many times it'll show the name of the mortgage company, maybe the accountant, maybe the bank or lender that's going to retain this document. So you always want to look at that to see if there's any relationship to the subject being investigated. If it's a deed, sometimes it'll show the mailing address for that subject or the prior address, which is valuable information. In this case, it's going to go right to the credit union that did the mortgage. And it'll have the information about the mortgage. It'll show the name of the party and also in many cases their marital status, a married man accompanied by his wife, because in some states that's a legal requirement to show the marital status. It'll show maybe a mailing address for that person and the amount of the mortgage. In this case, it was $25,000. And again, remember, this mortgage may be paid. This is a prior archived document. It's not for the purpose of information. It's just for the purpose of an example of how these things look. It'll have also a book and page legal description of the property. It'll have some details about the terms and conditions of the mortgage. Usually the first page, it has valuable information. Then you can scroll through until you get to the last one or two pages. And here's why. When you get to the signature page, you'll see a bunch of good information here. You'll have the signature of the borrower. Okay. It'll have the printed name of the borrower. It'll have a signature of the seller or lender and also a notary. Okay. And in many cases, it'll require witness signatures. And this one doesn't have witness signatures, but we'll look at it later. It'll show where this document was signed. So if, let's say, this is a Florida mortgage, but it was signed in DuPage County, Illinois, then that means that maybe the borrowers live in Illinois or they have a house in Illinois. So this is valuable information from this document. So we'll go back and we'll look at another example to see if we can find any more information. Let's look at a mortgage release. Here is a release of mortgage. Return to just goes back to the lender, so there's nothing really of any value on this one. Let's find another mortgage. You see, there's judgments. There's all kind of documents here. This mortgage is, here you go. When recorded, return to Indencom Global Services. So this is where that mortgage goes to. It was prepared by Sandra Hack, Phoenix, Arizona. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, here is a mortgage in Florida. It was prepared by an individual in Phoenix, Arizona. That individual may have some valuable information about your debtor. Okay, they may have a credit application. They may have tax returns. They may have banking information. So always look at this prepared by block for potential asset information. Okay, the borrower, Melissa Myers, formerly known as, there's a maiden name usually, and here's an address. Okay, so this address may be another address that's not known. It might not be the address of this mortgage. It may be a second home or a rental property. So always look at these top blocks to show who prepared it and where it goes to afterwards, because there's valuable information there. And again, most of the rest of it is usually boilerplate. It doesn't change much from one property to another. Parcel ID number, it gives you the address, which you probably already know. And then we'll scroll down to get to the signature pages to see what information, and always look on these pages to see if there's any markings in the margins. Sometimes an attorney or accountant or even the borrower will write something in the margin, a phone number, an email address. A lot of times we see that showing up. There's always going to be initials on all the pages to verify that they read all the pages. Again, this requires mortgage insurance. That may be something you want to look at for contact information. And then once we get to the signature pages, you see a mortgage is a very lengthy document, usually a lot of pages in a boilerplate mortgage. Deeds, not as much. Let's take a look at what the signature page has. Anytime I see bold, I always slow down there because sometimes that's information specific to that property. Here we go. Here's some signature pages. Okay, so you have, these are the two parties that signed a mortgage. Remember, the mortgage was in the name of Melissa Myers. Timothy Gordon signed as a non-applicant title holder. What that usually means is that the borrower borrowed money on a property that's owned by two people, and this other person had to sign saying, look, I'm not borrowing the money, I don't owe you the money, but I'm acknowledging that my property is pledged for this mortgage. Again, it may be a source of information about the debtor or the borrower, banking information, tax returns, that kind of thing. And here you go, two witnesses, okay? Lynn Bondanza and Linda Myers. Well, guess what? Linda Myers, Melissa Myers, same name. What this probably means is that these parties were present when this mortgage was signed. They may have gone to the closing agency, or in some cases, when a mortgage is done remotely, they mail you the documents, you sign them, and you have witnesses with you. These may be people that are associated with the borrowers. Again, nothing specific about these people or this mortgage. It's just an example of what to look at. These may be parties of, they may be relatives, they may be associates, they may be co-workers, they may be people that work in the same office, but you want to look to see who these people are and what the relationship is to the other parties. And worst case scenario, they have some knowledge of the signing of this document. And then there's going to be a notary. Okay, here's a notary. Here's Lynn Bondanza again. Well, she's the one who signed as another witness, which is fine. One of the things we like to do with notaries is look to see where it was signed, Manatee County. So it was signed in the same county where the property is located. But maybe do some research on this person. Google search them to see if they show up on LinkedIn. Where do they work? If they work at a bank, if they work at Wells Fargo Bank, or they work at Chase Bank, well, guess what? A lot of people will go to the bank where they have accounts to get something notarized because it's free. If you just walk into a random notary, it might cost you $10 or $15 or $20. If you go to your own bank where you have accounts, a lot of times it's a service provided for free by your bank because you're an account holder. So it's something to look at. You know, a lot of times we'll do a Google search or a LinkedIn search for the notary or even the witnesses to see if we can find out their employer and find out what bank they work at, because in some cases that might be a bank where this debtor has a or potential debtor, this a subject, not this particular person, but a subject has an account. It might be worth looking at. And then we scroll down to see what else is of interest. Okay, these are just addendums for the property. Well, how could that help you? Well, if this is a condo association, planned unit development is a condo, it'll give you the name of the development, Creekwood, and it's sometimes the contact information for the HOA. Well, that HOA has received payments from this property owner for HOA fees, for maybe assessment fees, and that may be something that has valuable information, maybe account balances for the HOA, maybe what type of checks were written for that, who paid for those fees. Because if your debtor has a property in their name but somebody else is paying for the fees, that may be a source of funds for your judgment. So all these pages have valuable information. We call it title forensics. This is one phase of the asset search just for real estate. And if you notice, just with this one document, there's a lot of potential information about assets. Well, let's take a look at one more just to see on a deed what information might be on a deed. So here's a property deed. It'll probably be a lot shorter, fewer pages. A deed is usually 1 or 2 pages. Again, book and page, who it's prepared by, Alliance Group title. Well, that title company in many cases will have vast information about the subjects, copies of driver's licenses, maybe tax returns. They could have financial statements. They certainly wrote a check at the closing for closing fees, so there's an account there. And it'll talk about who the parties are to the transactions. Again, signatures, witnesses. You want to see if any of these witnesses show up more than once. If the same witness signed on documents for the same party 2 or 3 times, especially over a period of time. This was dated 2008. This witness name is Lesh McMillan, it looks like. Or here it is, Leslie McMillan. If Leslie McMillan signed a document as a witness 5 years later for the same person, well, that means there's probably some relationship between the two. So you always want to look at all of the extra information. Again, you might want to look to see if Leslie McMillan works for a bank, because that might be a bank where the borrower or the deed holder may have accounts. So you want to look at even properties that have been sold. If, let's say, your debtor that you're looking for assets sold a property, well, you might overlook the deed to the property they sold. But if you look at that deed and you find out where the recorded deed was sent to, who signed as a witness, where the bank was, you can still get valuable information for anything related to that person. So let's look at one more in a real estate category, then we'll move on to vehicles. So you'll have that information. Here's a judgment. Let's just see what might be on a judgment. If you have a debt against a subject, likely somebody else does too. So here's a judgment, state of Florida against Stephen Smith. Again, you'll see the Social Security number is redacted. Normally you'll find that, but sometimes they slip up and you might see a social. At least you'll find the date of birth. This might help you. If look at the name, Stephen Smith. If you're looking for records on Stephen Smith, there might be 50 million Stephen Smith records because it's a common name. But now you have a date of birth, which you might narrow it down to other documents. In this case, it's alleged, again, this is not anything that's for certain, that a court has a judgment of a total of $451 against this person, and you can get information about who had the judgment. The lien holder is actually the clerk of court, and it has another address. Maybe this is a prior address, maybe a new address, but there's always information on a document that might be of interest, and you can't overlook anything. The more time you spend sifting and sorting through all these documents, the more information that could go towards your judgment. I know it's a little bit long-winded for the property records, but we'll look at one more. Release of lien. Okay, Stephen Smith. Now this is a different Stephen Smith because it's V instead of PH. Okay, has an address, has a parcel ID, and this is just a release of lien showing that this person or these people, in consideration of funds, had their lien released. So what was the lien for originally? It's unknown. but you could backtrack and look at what this original lien was for. So in property records, this is all public records, there's a vast treasure trove of information that you can look at that will help you track down potential assets, potential bank accounts, places to look, parties to contact. And remember, if you don't have records, or the debtor is not willing to give up records, either through legal processes or just simple requests, you may find parties in these documents that are willing to give up records. Let's say there's a landlord that rented property to Joe Schmo, and they were late on their rent and they have a lien against them. You call up that landlord and say, look, I'm trying to recover funds. Do you have a credit application? Do you have information about this person? Many times, creditors are willing to give you information, and there may not be any legal requirement that they don't. You may find former spouses. You may find counterparties to lawsuits. Maybe your subject sued somebody else and had to give up financial or information in that lawsuit. Again, get good legal advice. Make sure what you're doing is legal and you're not stalking anybody or harassing anybody. But there's a lot of information in these official records that'll help you pursue your lien or your judgment and recover funds. And we'll get to vehicles, bank accounts, and the other types of assets next, but this is the real estate portion of it that could come in handy. For a vehicle records asset search, it's usually a two-step process, and we'll go through both of those steps. The first step is requesting the information from the various motor vehicle departments. And here is an example in the state of California. All vehicle records information is regulated by a federal law called the DPPA, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act. In order to have information about vehicle ownership revealed, you have to go through that process at the state level. Here is the form INF 70 for California. Every state will have a different form, and it's a request for records information. And it tells you to read this carefully before using the form. You don't want to use it for nefarious purposes like stalking or illegal purposes, and that's where it talks about criminal penalties. And then are you using the correct form, certifying records, and then different requirements for driver's license information and vehicle records request. In this case, we're interested in a vehicle records request. You're going to need the VIN number, or if you're requesting for a person to show what information is available on a person, you're going to use the driver's license number. And then once you get down for the purpose of the request, these are permissible uses under the DPPA. And again, it references that here, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, United States Code. Even though this is being requested from the state, the regulation of private information is at the federal level. So the different states have to abide by that federal law. And the permissible uses will be listed here: legitimate business, insurance purposes, any other use specifically authorized under law, and litigation would be the permissible use. You have to sign it saying that you're using it for only legal purposes. And then here's the form itself. You're going to put in the requester information, that's you, the driver's license request if it's a person, the vehicle vessel record request if it's a vehicle by VIN number, and then the purpose of the request. It says see instructions, and you're going to type that here while you're using it. And then your certification, you're going to sign under penalty of perjury that you're using it for a particular purpose. And then there's a notice of records request if that's applicable, and then you're going to submit this form with the fee to the state. And normally the fees are very nominal. In the case of California, it's either $5 or $20 depending upon how you want that record presented to you, if it's certified or not. Different states will have different fees. Some states are free, some states are nominal, $2 to $3 to $5. But this is the first step of requesting the records. The next section of the video will discuss how to use those records in order to recover assets or to discover further assets prior to doing a bank account search. This is the vehicle asset search section of the investigation. And as you'll see, it's important to do this and the others prior to doing a bank account search. You want to save the bank account search for last for a couple reasons that we'll get into. So in the vehicle section, you'll see that first, when you do a vehicle record search using the DPPA form that we showed previously, you'll get results back that will first describe the vehicle. And as you can see, we've blurred out and redacted some of the records for privacy because it really doesn't matter what the exact ownership of this vehicle is. It's for demonstration purposes only. So in this case, it's a 2003 BMW. It'll have the VIN number, body type, color, which is important because sometimes people will change color of a vehicle. If they've painted it, you want to know what color is currently reflected in the title records. And then down here, it'll show title holder information, the name, address, county. It'll have the registrant, which sometimes the title owner and the registrant are two different individuals or companies. It'll show the dates of registration, and that's important because if a registration was renewed or reactivated, that'll give you information of when the person was at that address. In addition, if it's a new purchase and you can show the date that it was purchased, sometimes you can go back to the selling dealer and find out information about how that vehicle was paid for, what bank was used, or maybe even the source of funds if there were others there. They will have a lot of records at that dealership about the subject. And then below the ownership information, it will show lien holders. In this case, it's Real Reliable Rides. That's probably some type of buy here, pay here, or dealership in-house financing that sells cars and finances them to the buyer directly. And again, that dealership may have a great deal of information about the purchaser. In many cases, a buy here, pay here dealership will have pay stubs and direct deposit banking information about the purchaser. If it's a traditional lender like Wells Fargo or Chase, that'll have different records, and we'll get to that momentarily. It'll have the tag history, the license plate number, which is important because if somebody transfers tags, they normally will keep the same tag number, and that's good information to have. If you're having surveillance or monitoring of a person, a license plate will be good information to have. Here's another example of how a title record may reveal some ownership information. You'll find that in this case, the title holder is a different name, and that the lien holder is a credit union, Penn Air Federal Credit Union, and SunTrust Bank. So these are potential sources of accounts. A lot of times if somebody has a loan with a financial institution, they're given incentives to open an account at that institution. So they may have banking relationships with that institution at the credit union or at SunTrust Bank, and you can use that as a source of recovery of funds or writ of garnishment. Again, get good legal advice from an attorney on doing all this, rather than having to do a full bank account search that we'll talk about later. So these are two examples of how a vehicle records asset search will assist in finding assets maybe that are vehicles that can be seized. These may be vehicles that could be recovered or liened against, or sources of banking information that may have secondary purposes of providing a source of funds that can be recovered for a judgment. No matter what type of asset search or research you're doing, you should always look for corporate records for an individual. The reason why is because even if a person is not a major stockholder in a corporation or has a major company, they're self-employed, there may be corporate records as an officer, prior corporations, or a small mom and pop business, even a trade name, that may be helpful to track down assets. Again, they may be direct assets or lead to other assets. Here's an example of how that is searched. In the state of Florida, there is a Department of Corporations. The Secretary of State actually handles corporations in most states, and you can search their records. You can search by name of the corporation, officer, registered agent name, many other types of searches. But if you're going to search for officer or registered agent name, let's type in a random name. Last name is Smith, and we'll search now, and it'll give you all the corporations that have a officer or registered agent with the name Smith. And of course, a name like Smith, there will be many, many, many records. So we will select an example from this list. Aaron Smith, don't know who he is, don't know, this has nothing to do with an investigation, but it'll give you the name of the corporation, SNN H Landscape and Tree Service. Okay. This was filed in 2005, but is now inactive. it was dissolved for annual report. Basically, when the report was due in 2006, they never filed the report, so the company closed. It'll give you their address, mailing address, registered agent, which may be a different person. It also gives you authorized persons and officers. Here's a manager, Dean Hauk, Lake Mary. Different, well, it's the same address as the business address. So this is an example of where you can find information about this person. They had a business at one point. So maybe now you do a search about this business. Did it have a website? Did it have a Facebook page? Do they have any equipment? You can also take a look at the original filing, the document, to see how it was filed. Sometimes it'll be a name of a bank that has their original principal office. It has the members. It has a signature of the organizer. Okay, this is a Business Filings Incorporated company in Wisconsin, so that might be a source for records about this business. Has a certificate of a registered agent, again signed by that person. Look at all these documents as we normally do to see if there's any other information which might be, and actually from the looks of it, it's SNH, not SNH, it's SNH, so it's two abbreviations for initials. So if you look at the parties, SNH, well, I don't know who the H is. Yeah, Smith and Hauk. So there you go. That's the reason this company was started. So maybe this is a former business partner. There may be records, a tax return that exist for this business or for these parties that the other business party might have, the partner, they may want to share that. So this is another type of search. Again, these parties have nothing to do with an investigation. It was a random search, a random example given. Corporate records should always be used. Let's look at one other example to see if there's anything. And again, Aaron Smith looked like he had a lot of businesses, right? So here's somebody who may be an entrepreneur, and any one of these businesses, look at all the Aaron Smiths. Is it the same person? I don't know. Caribbean Clean Freaks. Let's take a look and see if it looks the same. Well, maybe, maybe not. But this is a business that's active. Okay, it was formed originally in 2019, so it's less than a year old. Again, you have a couple of addresses, and for this one, you have 1, 2, 3, well, a lot of them are the same people, at least 3 or 4 different authorized persons. Let's see what their corporate filing looks like. Standard corporate filing. Again, all the members. This is done by LegalZoom. Prepared it. Right? So anytime you have a record, always look at as many details as possible to see what might come up. Let's take a look at one more since we're doing this. Aaron B. Smith. And again, when you're looking at these records, look to see if any of these companies have websites that might be, or you can go back to the domain name search, which might be of value. Here we go. Here's an Aaron Smith, Claremont, Florida. Only one person. Formed in 2010, dissolved in 2011. Here is the corporate filing. Signature of member, Heidi Stouffer, attorney. So what we would do next is see if that attorney ever represented this person in any cases. We'll do a court case search in Florida for this attorney name to see if Aaron Smith or other parties show up as represented parties in cases, which might lead to other assets. Any type of searching, it's just a matter of time. The more time you spend on a search, the more records you look at, the more places that assets can show up. And I know the thing you want to get to are bank accounts. We'll get to that shortly because that's a type of search that seems like it would be the most direct route to get cash and assets. But in many cases, some of these other searches, for example, Smith Trio Exteriors, they may have a website, they may have equipment, they may have client list. These are things that seizing them may not give you a lot of value, but there may be negotiations involved in preventing the recovery of assets through those sources. So what you do is you select the names that you believe may be owned by your debtor, your subject, and we selected randomly this one at the bottom, tfnc.us, and you go to the registrar, which in this case is GoDaddy, and you do a whois lookup for that name. And here are the results for that whois lookup at GoDaddy. It'll tell you the name of the registrant, which is at the bottom, the Functional Neurology Center, address, phone number, and it'll give you an admin email. And this is additional information to look at. Chelsea@sundryarts.com. And now you can go back and do a search for sundryarts.com, find out what business that is, what the connection to the Functional Neurology Center is. You have a phone number you can reverse search. You also have the date at which this was created. It was created 2019, so it's less than a year old. The expiration date. So it gives you valuable information. And then, of course, you can go to the website itself and see what's on the website. You can even go to sundryarts.com and see what is there. So let's just do that randomly and see what happens when we go to sundryarts.com. Maybe an internet company. Yeah, so here it is. Here's a internet marketing company that is the administrative contact for this particular domain name. It's probably that this doctor, Jeremy Schmo, has this neurology center. He wants to stay busy being a doctor and pay attention to that. Hired this web development company to develop the site. But if you were searching for assets for a subject like Jeremy Schmo, and again, this is just an example. This is not somebody who, is being investigated. It's just somebody who we just pulled up the name. You maybe get some other information about their location. You may be able to get some information from the administrative contact. It's just a rabbit hole you can go down to find out more information about your potential subject or your debtor or where assets may be. You can maybe even look at this address here where the location of a registration is to see if there's a business location, facility, or even if it's just a mailing address. Sometimes it's the mailing address for the accountant that pays the bills, that pays the renewal on this domain name. So there's a couple intellectual property searches that are very valuable to find information about your subject. And next we'll take a look at another type of asset class that may yield results directly or indirectly from that search. There are a couple of very valuable intellectual property classes to search for when doing an asset search. These searches by themselves can result in finding assets that are claimable for recovery, but more importantly, they may also lead to other types of assets like bank accounts or other assets that may not be as visible. And the first place to search is for patents, trademarks, and copyrights, and that's done through the USPTO. They have an online portal. You can see it on the screen, and they have one for patents, one for trademarks. And if you look in trademarks, there's a search database called TESS, T-E-S-S. And if you click that, it'll give you some options for how to search that trademark system. There's a basic search, a logical search. So we'll just do the basic search to start with. And we'll start with, let's say, IBM. And we'll hit enter. And it'll show all the different types of searches that have IBM in it. But you're going to find here IBM Soft is not owned by IBM. It's owned by a company in China. So how do you get the exact company or the exact name you want? What you want to do is put it inside quotes. Okay. So if you hit submit now, if you click on this serial number, this is a trademark IBM Watson owned by the International Business Machines Corporation, aka IBM, and it'll show you the trademark. So you can search for business names, person's names to find trademarks, and then when you get into that trademark record, you'll find when it was filed, other information about what they do, and you can see this one was filed in 2011, if it's been updated. So this is the first intellectual property search to do, and you can do the same thing for patents. Now here's another very valuable search type that'll search for online website addresses that even more valuable information comes out of this than does from patents and trademarks. Other types of tangible assets include vessels and aircraft. And a good way to search for those are through the federal registration of those types of vehicles. So here is the FAA, which is responsible for registration of aircraft, and they have an FAA registry name inquiry. So I just put a random name, RUP, R-U-P. If you hit submit, it'll show you aircraft that are registered with people with that name, and even extensions of the name with 2 P's or different first names. And if you decide to select one of those because it matches your debtor or your subject, let's say we're going to select this particular one here. Again, this is totally random. That doesn't mean anything about the party. It'll show what type of aircraft it is, what year it is. It'll show when the certificate was issued. That might show when they purchased the aircraft. So you want to look at different asset adjustments around that time. Did they sell property? Did they write a check from a bank? So you want to look to see who the prior owner was to maybe see who paid them for this aircraft. It'll also show an address, which is very important because this address may not be the same one that you have. A lot of times people will register aircraft at another address for liability purposes, or they'll form an LLC at that address, and that's something to look at. It'll show the airworthiness date. That's originally when the plane was certified to be used as an aircraft. It'll also show with the transponders if it's a Mode S or the ASB has been installed. And sometimes that'll lead you to an aircraft A&P mechanic that also may have some information. If somebody brought a aircraft to a repair facility for upgrades and it cost $10,000 or $15,000, that facility has some information about that party. Contact information, maybe the name of the bank that the check was drawn from. So from this, you get a lot of good information, and their aircraft number can also be searched. If you take this this N number, okay, it's N33PL, okay, and you search it in other online databases, it may show flight plans of where that aircraft was flying to. It may show photos of that aircraft at different airports because there are aircraft plane watchers that do this. So by looking at those types of aircraft locator services, you could find that the person visits other areas. That may be a source for business interests. It may be a source for relatives. No one's going to spend hundreds of dollars flying their plane to a location if there's not some legitimate reason to go there. In addition, there's probably a location where this plane is based. If you look at Oakland, Tennessee, find out what the airport that's nearby. If it's tied down at that airport, there's going to be tie down fees and an account for that aircraft at that location. Another thing you can look at is for vessels. Sometimes you'll find vessels are registered as a Coast Guard certified vessel. If you put in the name of a vessel, I just put in Sea Swirl, you'll find that there are vessels listed with the hull ID number. Okay, so we're going to select this one. It'll show you that hull ID number, where it's flagged, recreational, and it'll have information about the ownership and registration of that vessel. And many times owners of larger vessels will make their boat become a U.S. Coast Guard certified vessel. It gives you some advantages. You don't have to register in the state where you're located. And there's also some advantages for being exempt from certain types of salvage liens. If your boat gets stuck, they can't take your boat because they towed it and charge you storage. So if you find a boat is a certified U.S. Coast Guard vessel, that may be a source for finding out more about where it's kept, maybe the original purchase date, and who the prior owners are. So those are two types of non-vehicle and real estate assets that are tangible, boats and planes, that a lot of time is overlooked, and you can find valuable asset information there. So next, we'll take a look at some intangible intellectual property assets that might be worth looking at to find the best way to get recovery for your debt. For the bank account search portion of an asset discovery, there are three types of bank account searches that can be performed. And as you can see from the prior types of asset classes, vehicles, real estate, intellectual property, there may be banking information that is discovered in those sections. So we recommend doing that first because those are types of searches that either can be done yourself as a claimant, as a plaintiff or a creditor, or even if you hire an investigator. Those are the least expensive types of searching that can be done. It takes the least amount of effort. The banking searches, first of all, have a higher hard cost and also more labor involved as an investigator. So we recommend doing the other types of searches first. Once you get to the bank accounts, then you can make a decision of which searches to do. And there are 3 types. The first is a Swift banking messaging system search source. So within the banking system, there are Swift codes and Swift communications that are done that exchange banking codes and activities amongst the different financial institutions. And that data and those records can be searched to discover bank account records. And there's various sources for that. You'll see those listed on our website at activeintel.com. That's the first type of search. The second type of search is a check verification system research process. So there are various check verification systems, checks free, paychecks, different systems. You'll see those listed. If you go to, let's say, a major retailer, Walmart, Target, and you go to write a check at the cashier stand, there's a system that shows that they're verifying the check. And those systems have access points where there are bank record search sources that can use that to verify bank records and banking balances for a subject debtor. And the third type is a public record search. So those are searches of public data that's been posted normally by the debtor that shows their banking information. Each one of those searches may have different results. For example, if you search for Joe Schmo with a certain social security number, you may find that each search will have different results. Sometimes they're exactly the same. Sometimes you'll find that one shows certain banks that another one doesn't. So the first decision is going to be, do you want to run all 3? Do you want to run just one of them and maybe have fewer results? The issue is, even if you run all 3, there may be banking records that don't show up on any of them if they're not reporting to those 3 sources. So as an example, you may find that one of the banking sources might have a cost of $100 or $200. Another banking source might have a cost of $800 to $900. So if you run one of them, you could spend a couple hundred. If you run all 3, you could spend over $1,000. So it's a cost reward type of a decision process. And if you look at our website, activeintel.com, you'll see the various options, ordering directly through those sources or having us do it for you to see which bank search source you want to do. But this is just a narrative of what types of sources are available and what the differences between the 2 are. Typically, the Swift banking system search will have more results in most cases. However, if a depositor has a level of accounts through some obscure banks, credit unions, small regional banks, brokerage accounts, they may only show up in the checks free system or vice versa. So as you're doing your bank account search, look at the different sources. We'll have a link provided in this video, or you can just go to activeintel.com and look for the asset search section to see what options you have for the bank searches. Now, once you have all this, the real estate, the vehicles, the banking, intellectual property, then you can take a look and see what next steps are available for recovery of those assets. It may be writ of garnishment, it may be liens, it may be foreclosures, and you can get good assistance for that using qualified attorneys or qualified legal assistants. Coordinate that with your investigator so that your attorney knows what information the investigator has, and vice versa. You want to make sure your investigator knows what legal theory your attorney is using to pursue these assets, and make sure it's done right. Make sure you're not violating any privacy laws or collection laws. But first, identify the assets, make sure you have the good documentation of what the assets are, and then you can start the process of recovery after the asset search is completed. So those are the various types of asset class searches to be performed. If you do them in that order, you'll have the best results. Make sure you keep good notes and spreadsheets on the results you get. There's some forms that you can use that we provide on our website, activeintel.com. You can download those for free and use those. If you would like to have the sources for each type of search for your particular subject, we have an assisted do-it-yourself search option available. You'll find that on the website, activeintel.com. And once you go through each asset class, you'll have all of the available asset claims that you can make against your debtor. Ways to make that are usually done through the court or through a legal process where you do a writ of garnishment or other type of seizure. And then once you have those in place, you'll have the maximum amount of probability of collecting and recovering your losses, whether through a judgment or through some fraud against your debtor. And you have that information. You can start at the beginning of a case and you can match it up with the assets at the end of a case and see if that debtor has squandered or diminished any of the assets, which in many cases your attorney or your legal theory can use for proof of bad faith or fraudulent conveyance of assets, and check with your attorney on how to best prosecute those. If you have any questions, you can reach us at our website, activeintel.com, and we'd be glad to help.